to introduce Jennifer Shelton. She is from Real Options for Women. And Jennifer has had a wonderful track record with Counsel for Life. One year she was able to speak to she and her husband were able to speak to our board. But her story, her personal story, I think will be very moving to each of you. When she began a search for her birth mother, and her mother joined in, and they discovered a special connection. And so shortly after that, she began working at Real Options. So I'm just delighted to hear her story, and thank you, Jennifer, for being with us.
Well, I am just delighted to be with you. Thank you, Counsel for Life, for having me. And thank you for what you guys do for the life issue all around the DFW area. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story, how God brought me to fight for life, because it's not something that I intended when I was a little girl. I didn't think, I'm going to be over a pregnancy center. That wasn't my what I thought God had for my path, but now looking back, I see that that is exactly his plan. He had everything put into place so that I could be where I am today, and every day he shows me something new, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm going to share a couple of statistics with you that probably most of you know. I don't have to sell you on the fact that we have an issue with abortion in our country. But just so you know, since Roe versus Wade, we have had over 60 million abortions. And a lot of times it's easier to say abortion than lost a child. But that is what we have lost, is generations of children. And that's the reason why we have to stand up and do something about it. 1 in 4 women by the time they're 45 have had an abortion, and that's including inside our churches as well as outside our churches. The other thing is that out of 10 unplanned pregnancies, 4 of them will end in abortion. The reason why I wanted to share that statistic with you is because I am one of those babies. One of those 10 babies is me, and to be honest, I probably should have been one of the 4. I want to tell you a little bit about my journey and my adoption process. I was always told I was adopted, so it wasn't something that was a shocker to me at one point where I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't know this. In fact, my parents always said, when I was very young, I didn't understand the concept of adoption, and so they would just say, Jennifer, you're adopted, so that makes you special. So what did I do? I went to preschool and told everybody, I'm special because I'm adopted. And I remember one day this little boy comes up to me and puts his hand on his hip, and he said, well, what does adopted mean? And I said, be back. So I ran home and I said, Mom, what does that mean? What does adopted mean? And she tried in her most gentle way to sit me down and talk to me about what adoption was. And I remember in my little 4-year-old head, I couldn't grasp what she was saying. The only thing that I was getting was, wait, you're not my mom? And so I remember crying and running to my room, and I sat down, and in my 4-year-old wisdom, I was going to figure this out. I was going to figure out what in the world was going on. And then it just was like, it clicked. My mom came in, she sat down with me, and she said, honey, I will always be your mom. But you had another mom that loves you so much that she allowed us to raise you because we prayed for you for so long. And I thought, that makes me even more special. So I was good with it. In fact, I told people I was adopted all the time. I didn't have this yearning inside of me that, oh my goodness, I'm missing something. I've got to find them. In fact, people would always ask me, do you want to find your birth mother one day? And frankly, my answer was, no, I'm good. I'm so appreciative of her, but I don't feel a need to go find her because honestly, I was afraid that maybe that would bring up pain for her, and I didn't want that to happen. Now, back then, because I'm old, everything was closed, so that we didn't have the option of an open adoption. In fact, it was so closed that back then, neither party, biological mother or the adoptive parents knew each other. They didn't know their names, and they never saw each other during the adoption process. In fact, my mom had to bring someone with her to go into the delivery room to get my birth mother to sign the relinquish papers because they couldn't have any contact. So we really knew nothing about her at all. And so my parents had always said, if you ever want to know something, you just let us know. We will help you. You don't ever have to do this on your own. Well, I was a senior in college at Ouachita Baptist, and I started having very vivid dreams about a young girl being pregnant. And every time I would wake up, I would think, okay, what is that all about? And I just felt like the Holy Spirit just kept prompting me, you need to find her now. This is the time. So after about a week of fighting with the Lord, which I do often, I always lose, but I decided to call my dad, and I said, Dad, I really do want to know something about my birth mother. Could you find something out? Well, lucky for me, my dad's a private investigator, so that was easy. And so he found her name, and he called my mom in and said, do you want to know her birth mother's name? And she said, sure. So he told her, and her face went pale, and she ran out of the room. She comes running back in crying, carrying a coffee cup, and my dad thinks she's lost her mind. And she said, I know her. So my birth mother was 14 when she got pregnant with me. My mom was teaching her at the time. My birth mother had gone through a lot of hardships growing up, and so when she got to, she had moved back with a family member, and she didn't tell anybody she was pregnant. Nobody. Until, in fact, she didn't tell anybody or go to the doctor until she was 8 months pregnant with me. Well, through a series of God events, a pastor who knew my parents and also knew my birth mother arranged this adoption through an agency. And so my mom called my birth mother for the first time and said, do you remember me? And she said, of course, you were my favorite teacher. And she said, well, we have something else in common. And she told her about me. They both began to cry. My birth mother said, if I could have picked one person in the entire world for her to go to, it would have been you. And the reason my mom had brought this coffee cup back was because my mom recognized that this young girl just needed some support and love and some extra care. And so many afternoons after school, Loretta, my birth mother, spent the day after school in my mom's room. And so when she graduated high school, she had brought her this coffee cup, and my mom had kept it all these years. So the other unique thing is that when we started speaking with her and talking about this, we found out that, like I said, no one knew. In fact, back then it was so taboo to be pregnant that young. She went to a host family in a host town somewhere else, and so she just took a semester off of school. She didn't tell anybody. She didn't tell anybody she was pregnant. She didn't tell anybody she gave birth. She didn't tell anybody she had an adoption. And once it was all done, she came back to school, and no one knew. And so what we found out was when I was about a month old, my dad had brought me to the school to see my mom. And this little girl was in my mom's room, like she normally was after school. And my mom said, do you want to hold her? So she got to hold me and had no idea who I was. And so now I see how God protected me from so many different things, because when you talk about 10 unplanned pregnancies and 4 are aborted, there's really no better case than mine. 14-year-old girl that had a lot of things going on in her life, not a whole lot of support from different people, don't know who the father is, all of that. Most people would have said it would just be better to have an abortion. But she bravely chose life along with her family. They helped her make an adoption plan. And the other side of that is my parents had gone through 10 years of infertility. They had gone through 4 failed adoptions. And my mom had told the Lord, you know what, after I turn 35, if you haven't brought us our child, I'm just going to take that as a no from you and move on. I love how we put limitations on God, and then he just says, thanks, but I'll do it my way. And that's exactly what he did, because when my mom was 35 years old, she got a call and said, we have a baby girl. Do you want to come get her? And so that was, and now, in fact, later on, my mom found out that, like I said, she had 10 years of infertility. And when I was probably about 3 or 4 years old, she had to go in for a hysterectomy and all of that. And when they went through that process, the doctor came to her and said, you know, you had a very minor issue that could have been easily fixed and you could have had children. And when my mom told me this as an adult, I said, Mom, that's terrible. I'm so sorry. Are you mad that that doctor didn't find that out? And she said, no, because you were meant to be my daughter. And that was God's plan all along. And so there were a lot of moving pieces that God put together so that I could be here. But what I didn't know is the reason why I think the Lord started really bothering me with wanting to know Loretta was that 6 months after I found her and found out my story, I really felt a need to work in women's ministry. I just loved women. I had worked at a Christian girls' home. I loved ministering, and so that's what I wanted to do. So when I graduated Washita, I had a biblical studies major, which my parents said, what are you going to do with that? So I had a friend that was moving back to the North Dallas area, and she said, why don't you come with me? And she said, you know, there's lots of churches here. Maybe you can find a position where you can start. So I had all these resumes out. I'm kind of a type A personality, and so I was like, I'm going to get a job. And as soon as I got here, I just felt this peace from the Holy Spirit that this was where I was supposed to be. And so I called my parents, and I was just naive enough to believe that that's what God was going to do. And so I called them and said, I'm going to get a job this week. I'll come back next weekend to get my stuff. That's what they did too. They laughed at me. And so I went to all these interviews. I got told no a million times. And then finally, I sat down in my friend's living room, and with no other logic other than there had to be women at a pregnancy center, I flipped open the yellow pages, because that's what we used back then, and I called the first pregnancy center that I saw. It happened to be Real Options. When I called, I said, do you have any openings? The girl who answered the phone said, no, and we don't have any. And I'm going to hang up the phone, and all of a sudden she said, wait, I'm leaving. So, yeah, I guess so. And so I sent in my resume. I went in, and I had an interview that day. By the end of the week, I had a job with Real Options, and I went and moved all my stuff to the North Dallas area. So that is how I got to Real Options 16 years ago. But my story doesn't end there, even though God absolutely orchestrated every bit of it. There's even more. I met and married my husband. We're going to be married 10 years, or just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And, you know, we both love Jesus. We both were very committed to abstinence. We both really wanted to do things God's way. And then actually a week before we got married, Real Options brought him on doing abstinence education. And so we were doing ministry together, and it was perfect. And so everything was going to be perfect, and there was going to be no problems, right? Because that's what you do when you love Jesus, no problems. And so I just figured, you know, we were going to be married a couple of years, and then we were going to have babies, and that was going to be great. And it didn't happen like that. A year into that, I thought, Lord, am I ever going to have a baby? I don't understand. I see women who come in every day who've said, I only had sex once, and I'm pregnant. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And then finally, I found out I was pregnant. And I was so excited, and we had all these plans, and I had, you know, all these baby names on my phone, and I just had all these things ready in my mind and my heart for this child. And then about 5 weeks into it, I found out I was miscarrying. And it was devastating. I mourned that child so much, and so I just thought, okay, Lord, I'm just going to trust you. I don't understand, but I'm going to trust. 4 months after that, I found out I was pregnant again. And I was equal parts excited and terrified. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just thought I'm going to keep taking one step in front of the other. I went to my first sonogram. Things were good. I went to the next sonogram. We heard the heartbeat. I went to my next sonogram. We saw a little movement and all of this. And so we started making all these plans. And then we went to my next sonogram appointment, and that beautiful little heartbeat was gone. I remember this so well because I found that out at our clinic on our sonogram table. And I remember sitting up and saying, God, you can't be good. You can't be good and allow this to happen. In this same room that I found out that I lost a child, all these other women are coming through this room and not wanting a child. You can't be good. And so I really struggled with my faith. I really struggled with the goodness of God and his sovereignty, but I needed to walk through that journey. I needed to walk through and realize that I had to trust him no matter my circumstances, and no matter if he answered my prayers the way I wanted him to or not. And so 4 years later, I'm still wanting to be a mother. No more pregnancies had happened. We went on a retreat for our staff members from Real Options. We went to Billy Graham, the Cove, in North Carolina. It is beautiful. And I was at a point where I'm not super proud of it, but me and God, we were fighting. I was not on speaking terms. I was not very happy with him. I would get good, and then something would happen, like 300 baby showers in 1 year that I had to go to, and then I would fall back into this, Lord, I don't understand, and I'm mad. And so I was in that place where I was not so happy with him. And so begrudgingly, I grabbed my journal and I grabbed my Bible and I went on this little prayer trail that they had in the middle of the woods. It was kind of sprinkling, raining. And I went and I found this bench in the middle of the forest. It was just this little cove that you could sit in, no one else around. And I sat down and I just poured my heart out to the Lord and said, Jesus, you know what I want more than anything in the world is to be a mother. But if you never answer that prayer, you are still good. I cried. It was not pretty cry. Some people are like, oh, I glisten. No, I don't glisten. It was not pretty. And all of a sudden, and this has never happened to me before or since, but I heard my name. And I turned around and I actually thought it was my husband. I'm thinking, how did he find me out here? And there was no one there. It had to be the Lord speaking my name. And then he spoke to my heart a promise that I held on to. He said, I have called you to be a mother. And if you delight yourself in me, I will give you the desires of your heart. So I wrote that verse in my journal, and then I felt called to write a letter to this child that I didn't know, and that I didn't even really know if she would ever be. I didn't even know if she would be a girl, but I felt like I was supposed to write a letter to Ava Jane. So I did. I wrote this letter, I folded it up, I put it in my journal. I didn't tell anybody about the letter. I didn't tell anybody about the name. I just kept it, and I put it down as an anchor that, Lord, this is your promise, and I'm going to trust you with it. 4 years after that, I was still in a waiting period. I was still in a journey. But I had, through that journey, got to minister to so many women who had been through the same things with infertility and child loss. And that was so meaningful to me that I got to use my pain to help others. And I was at our clinic one day. I was having kind of a bad day, and I wasn't sure if I could minister to anybody. But this young woman came in, and there was no one to see her. And so I went back with her, and we sat down, and one of the things we always ask is, have you ever had an abortion? And she said, yes, I have, but it didn't bother me at all. I said, okay. And so she decided that she kept going on, and she said, it's really no big deal, I'm fine, and I'm planning on having another abortion because that one didn't bother me, so that's just my plan, and that's what's best right now. And I just felt like the Holy Spirit kept saying, tell her your story. And of course, me arguing, no, she doesn't want to know my story. This isn't about me, it's about her. But it was just consistent. Tell her your story. So finally, I looked at this young girl and I said, I know that you said you had an abortion and it doesn't bother you, and I respect that. But I want you to know that I've had several miscarriages and I am grieving those children. And if at any point you need to grieve, it's okay to grieve. And she just began to weep. She pulled out her wallet and said, I want to show you something that I've never shown anyone. And she pulled out a sonogram picture and she handed it to me and she said, this is my son the day I aborted him, and I have grieved every day since. And in that moment, two mothers who were grieving, two mothers who had lost children, different circumstances, but grieving mothers nonetheless, prayed together. We cried together. We healed together. And because of that, I saw that God still had a purpose for me. And this young woman chose life for the baby she was carrying. And then my husband we were at a church service. It was during a worship service, and so I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he just reached over, and I could tell he was praying, but I didn't know what he'd said, or I couldn't hear anything. And I for some reason, I didn't ask him afterwards. And anyway, 2 weeks later, I find out I'm pregnant. I am terrified. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this has been so long. And so I started having some complications, and I just knew that it was another loss. And I didn't know if my heart could take that. And we went to my first sonogram, and I wouldn't even look at the screen. I just looked away. And all of a sudden, my husband starts jumping up and down. There's a heartbeat! There's a heartbeat! So I looked, and we're both just crying, and the sonographer said something. She said, do you want to know when the conception date was? Okay. It was the exact same day as when my husband felt the Holy Spirit tell him to pray over me and to open my womb. And 9 months after that, our Ava Jane was born. She's now 2 years old, and I get to see God's goodness and faithfulness of how he saved me from an unplanned pregnancy, and then showed me how my pain could help others. And then also in his amazing goodness and faithfulness, he did call me to be a mother. And so I'm grateful for the journey he took me on, because if not, I wouldn't be in the place I am today. And that's why I'm so grateful for the crowd of you who fight for life, so that another baby is born that can take up this fight after I'm gone. Thank you, guys.